Welcome back to the Berg Podcast. Thanks for joining us today. With me today is Ford.
Hey, how's it going?
And Dan.
Hey, everybody.
And today we're talking about the paths to I almost said paths to education. That's not it. Paths to construction, education versus not. And I think what kind of inspired some of this conversation was probably 2 months ago, maybe, had a conversation here on the podcast about all of the folks who were graduating from a program of sorts, right? And I think it was high school, some BCTC type classes. I think we had one coming from a 2 or 4 year technical school. So kind of got us on the topic of, is there a right path, and what do the different paths actually mean?
Well, one thing that is just funny, but just it started with, I don't think it's just because people say this. I think it's book learning versus field learning, right?
Okay.
I mean, I think that's what really the difference is, because there's multiple ways to do this. It's just that like people are like, oh, one way or the other. And it's, the reality is, I think we always talk about this, but you're always should be learning. Like no matter if you're 22, 12 or 52, you're always learning new things. So it's just a question of like, are you going to go down the book path, or are you going to go down a different path to get to where you're trying to go?
Yeah, the continuous education, never stop learning.
Reading books,
Yep.
Newspapers,
Yep.
Or even just through action.
Watching people do things.
Yeah, watching, if you have somebody that's in the field trying to learn how to do it, labor, and they're watching a guy do it, that's learning.
Yeah, you said it in a podcast recently, Ford, about like the knowledge gained by just having to figure something out, whether you knew how to do it or not, right? Yeah, so some of that is crucial to growth in any position, in any walk of life.
Yeah, and a lot of that has to happen even with education. Just because you go to school and someone teaches you to do something doesn't inherently. I'm not a big believer that it's an equivalent to experience.
Right.
Like when they've recently started to make it that if you have or equivalent experience, and they really started to respect that more. I argue a lot of times that someone with the experience may actually have more usable knowledge than somebody who just learned what it is you want to do.
Yeah.
In a lot of fields.
Yeah. I think a lot of it, obviously everybody learns in different ways, right? I think even the three of us would have preferences when it comes to how we gather and execute new skills or information. And I think that probably is a big part of the decision maker for anyone really considering their path to the trades. How do you learn? Do you need for someone to, take 6, 8, 12, 18 months to kind of show you how to do it? Can you get a little bit of a exposure to it? Can you just jump straight in and absorb it like a sponge? And I think that's got to be part of the equation when especially young folks coming out of high school are considering a field in the trades, a job in the trades. What does that look like for them, and what should their next steps be?
Well, the other thing is, it's a dollars and cents situation too. Not saying one way is better or the other, but it's just the reality of what the cost is to get that information. And is there different ways to get the same education on a more cost-effective manner?
Yeah.
If somebody came straight out and went to work and learned in the field for 3 years or 4 years and we're getting paid the entire time, or somebody went and paid for that same amount of time, and if it was coming out of their pocketbook or they were taking out loans for it, that's a huge swing. And by the end of it, they might be in the same place. So that's something they have to really do the math on to see what's best for them.
And another thing that I think is relevant in making a decision is your knowledge base. So like, what do you know before you start? And it's not, so like in our specific industry, I'm not saying, do you know how to run a dozer? Though there are certainly kids who know how to run equipment like that because they were on a farm, or their dad had a business, or they even had a small farm. There's any number of different ways.
Their uncle was a landscaper. Any way they had a chance.
Any way that they may have had a chance to do it. And it sounds funny, but even if, because the experience doesn't have to be in the dozer. We could be a laborer. It can be any sort of thing, where you know how to do things, or even, kids work on cars, or they do, any of these things. And you learn some base level of skills that you have that other people don't. And maybe that helps you to make a decision. It reminds me of when you go to take a class And, there's a prerequisite to the class. And if you don't have the prerequisite, you're not able to take the class. And partly that's an assumption, right? Because it assumes that if you haven't had the previous class, you can't know this. But
Sure.
that's not inherently true. And when you really get into the actual, work world, it becomes obvious whether you know it or not pretty quickly, whether you may have had all the classes, but it doesn't mean that you know how to run that piece of equipment. And we always want to make it run the equipment, or at least I make it that. And
Right.
it's so much more than that. You don't know what we're doing. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? Like, you don't understand the job. You don't understand the process, the operation, what we're trying to achieve.
Mhm.
And that's something that can be learned in the classroom, but really is learned through action. And the best place to learn it, we see internally, we've always thought was our special projects division. Because special projects gives you a look at a little bit of everything we do and in-depth work on a specific group of skills. And then the skills translate to a larger job or a different job or any number of things. But if you've done it for special projects, you can likely do it for commercial or landfill. You just have to learn how to apply that knowledge to an experience that you haven't done yet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think the part that we often leave out of the conversation is like, you might want to go and work in the trades, but what is it that you want to do? Right. Because I think you're right. I think that there are certainly a wide variety of things that do not require any formal education. But there are probably things that do. I don't think we don't necessarily consider like my job to be one of in the trades, but it's certainly not a job that I don't think I could have gotten without my education. At least the path that got me here required that I, at the time, have an education and a degree. And maybe I could have gotten there a different way. But so I think that there are some things that like some level of formal education is still required for, or at least, if not required, assumed to be needed. So I think that that's part of the conversation that sometimes gets left out. We've had the benefit though, really, of seeing it all. I think we've got quite a few people who came to us because of their experience somewhere else, did not have formal education. We've got a number of young guys, young people, I should say, who came to us strictly with their exposures from high school. Some of it was trade related, some of it wasn't. And then we've got a handful of folks who did go to some sort of post high school education, some of it trade specific, and and then found a path here, or found a path to us to do things where, it worked for them. It was the right mechanism to get them where they wanted to go. Right.
I think the other problem is that, like, as you were talking about, we're in civil construction and everybody thinks about just the field side of our business. It's very important. That's what we do. But to run a business, there's all the other business functions that are needed that you don't really think about. You know what I mean? Like, it's just so interesting because AP, AR, HR, safety, like all this stuff is all part of the business, but everybody's always focusing more on what's happening in the field. And the field
Sure.
is what gets the work done, but you need the entire process in order to get the entire project done.
Sure. And I think about some of the components too, especially as our industry becomes more heavily inundated with technology. Some of the components that are technology based, you might not have to go to college for, but you need some exposure to those technologies and systems prior to really being able to function within them or be able to do them at what I would say is like a career level. So I think about a guy like Scott Manning, for example, right? Like Scott, the things that Scott needs to do, especially from a technology basis, he had to have some level of formal learning. It was likely not a place where we could have just inserted him and said, do these things, and he would have had the skills necessary to do them. So,
well, and I think it's also tied to your risk factor, your risk meter, we'll call it, right? I mean, It depends on, are you willing to take chances? Are you willing not to take chances? Like getting into the field, a lot of young people, they want to go work with maybe a large organization because they like the safety in it, or the safety of that. It's a big company, yada yada. But if you go work with a smaller company, you're probably going to see more stuff. But then it's just that, depends how your family you were raised. Depends if, maybe your parents had the same job for 30 years and they like just having that security of being in one place. So we always joke about risk meters because it does really matter what your internal risk meter is what you're willing to try will kind of affect you in how you're going to turn out.
Yeah, that's a great point. Would you say, yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was going to say, and when we're talking about all the other roles that happen, even there, I think there is so much of this that happens outside of a classroom, in terms of whether it be anything that goes on in extracurricular activities in school or at your home or, where you choose to vacation or anywhere else. It's all these things that build a knowledge base that enable you to just do the simple things. Like when you think about like, do you know how to change a tire? Like Aaron always talks about like life skills, like what life skills do you have? And I think, we talk about learning and we're talking about, learning our trade and we're talking about learning in school, but I feel like there's a gap in there that may be the most important in like a young person coming into our industry, whether it be in the office or in the field, which is someone who learned how to do things to have like life skills is inherently more open to be a learner, right? To be that lifelong learner that you need, because anyone can learn to do anything. Like in other words, you could take any person, I think,
almost anybody,
almost any person in our industry. You could take almost any person in our team that wants to learn, and you could teach them to do a role if they wanted to.
Yeah.
And then we get into the predictive index conversation of where like, is it a good fit for them, for their personality? There's all these things that go into it. But I'm saying, I don't think in most jobs, there are skills so specific that they can't be learned if someone is willing to learn them. And I think that's where I'm trying to get to, is that part of it is not just that you have the learning, not just that you are exposed to it, whether it be in the school or in the field, but that you want to learn. You have like a thirst to learn something, a desire to be, self-sufficient, a desire to be able to achieve things or to do things. You know what I mean? And when you have that, that's what really leads to people who you see growth in. Like they talk about a growth mindset, and I guess that's really what I'm getting at is someone with a growth mindset. The opportunities are endless in any of the industries and the trades. You just have to want to do it and then be willing to pay the price, to put in the work to get to that point.
Yeah. I was thinking that while you were saying that. So like, I love that you finished there with like, you have to be willing to pay the price. And some of it could be tangible costs and some of it is like opportunity costs, right? Like you've got to be willing to do the thing which will cost you something to get the result. And in saying that, I think that like going back like a minute or two to something you said when you started that conversation about like the difference between like formal, maybe classroom style education and things that like you should know in life. And I thought that was like an interesting concept or an interesting thought to bring up, because so much of what I think we deem to be life skill is learned out of necessity. And I think what like I struggle with as a parent, and I think that I see it sometimes in young people, whether it's in our organization or not, is that like because of a lack of necessity, because of means, methods, convenience, whatever it might have been, because of a lack of necessity, they didn't have to do some of those things or learn some of those things. Like it was funny. And this is like partially off topic. Brad and I were talking one day and, he were talking about the weekend and I said, yeah, I had to replace the brakes on my son's car. My son and I replaced the brakes on his car over the weekend. And he's like, you know how to replace the brakes? And I was like, oh yeah. I mean, it's an older car, a little less intimidating, but yeah, I mean, since I owned a car, I couldn't afford to take it somewhere to get fixed. If I wanted to drive the thing, for the most part, I had to do maintenance, right? I had to, do the brakes. I had to change the oil. Things that were, I thought, within reason and that I could.
You didn't pop an engine out last weekend or anything, did you?
No, my dad and I did replace the transmission in that little Mitsubishi, but I rebuilt it actually, but out of necessity. And I've thought about that as a parent at times, like, what do we pass on to younger generations that because of means, like I don't necessarily have to change my own oil anymore, right? I'm able to pay for someone to do it. And a lot of times it's out of convenience, not because I can't, but because time-wise, it's easier to spend 30 minutes checking emails in the lobby of a Jiffy Lube or whatever while someone does it for me. So are we not passing those life skills on to other people? Well, and what difference does that make potentially in the need for
training,
education training,
that they don't have the base skills, and you lose them. Like, I don't.
So that's like probably way deeper.
No.
Well, I mean, I can get a couple stories about that, but
and Ford can say a few things here. But it's interesting. I think Brian and I talked about it. I don't know if it was Ford and I or Brian and I, but I think with one of you, I had a conversation that I have like two little things that I need to do on my car, on my Mustang, before I really should drive it again. And the one is so simple. All I have to do is change the fuel filter. I know where the fuel filter is. I found the fuel filter. I bought the fuel filter. I bought the tool to remove the hoses. In my younger ages, I would have been sure I could just remove that with a pair of pliers, but with an older car that I'm trying to be careful with, I bought the right tools. And it might not have even been you guys. It might have been Aaron. And I said, but it's the oddest thing. I'm a little bit intimidated to mess with that car because, I've had the car since I was 18.
Right.
I worked on like the sister car that I bought of that car for the whole time I had it. Like you, out of necessity, I could afford the car, but not afford to have somebody else change the brakes or do a tune up or change the oil. So I did all that myself. So I've worked on this exact car, but I'm hesitant because it's been, because of life, like life happened. I got busy and convenience and my means allowed me to pay someone else to do these things, or with a work truck, the shop takes care of it.
Sure.
And so I don't do it. So there's nothing about this job that I don't know how to do, but I'm hesitant to do it. Like, I'm going to do it. And and once I do it, then I thought about it with you with the brakes. Like, I've changed the brakes on that car. I go through it and I was like, I could do almost everything that I would want to do to that car and have done it to the other model of that car I had, but I'm hesitant because of time. So there's a different piece to learning, that once you learn something, you have to continue to use it. Because if you don't use it, much like, working out or any other skill, it dissipates. There's, I would argue, and this, I'll ask Ford the question. Do you think you are as good an operator right now as you were when you were operating?
No.
Right now, Ford's a good operator. I'm not knocking him, but I just thought about it in that sense that this is exactly what we're talking about, that you have somebody who developed these skills, had inherent skills that are just part of Ford.
Sure.
Then had a learning base because of Tom and Carol that enabled him to have an advantage over what he would be able to do, and a work ethic and a growth mindset that allowed him to do it. And he took off on it. But then his skills were required in other parts of the company, and he would do it less and less and less. And now you get out probably more than you did 4 or 5 years ago, but less than you would have earlier in your life.
Less than I prefer.
But I wondered that, because I also will say, like, well, if somebody needs somebody and we're out of people, I'll be like, well, I'll see if I can get Ford over there. I mean, I can't send you a better operator than Ford. And I'll say that, and I believe it, but he doesn't run equipment every day anymore.
The other day I loaded trucks. I did not bang a side. I was real happy about that because it's been a minute. And like the size of our equipment compared to what I used to use is a little bit bigger. So you got to be able to pay attention. But no, there's like multiple factors to this. It's so funny because two things. I'm sure a lot of people that are in the trades are generally handy people.
Sure. Yep.
And probably a lot of their spouses are very aggravated because they want to do everything themselves versus pay somebody else to do it. And then it doesn't get done.
Yeah.
We have
or part of it gets done and then it sits while you wait for the part, or,
exactly.
I'll get to it next weekend.
Really, you were going to do this and it just didn't happen, or you got tired. And, I think there's a time benefit analysis that really becomes more into play. I mean, but there's two stories. I have a family member and went to their house out of town, and they wanted me to help them change out a fan, like in a room. It's like, all right, well, give me your tools. They didn't even have a screwdriver on them because they'd never been in that world. And it was just like, I grew up, everybody had, probably had like 3 in their pickup truck just because a screwdriver is used for everything.
Yeah.
And then another one, they were like, oh, yeah, well, we don't have our kids have jobs during high school because they have to focus on their education. And the life skills that they missed because they were so focused on one thing really kind of, you know, those basic things, whatever they might be, the changing the oils might be learning to shake a firm handshake and look someone in the eyes or communicate with people or whatever the situation is. It's truly amazing how everyone today is becoming such a specialist. There was actually a conversation I had with a guy that owned hardware stores, and you would think a hardware store in more populated areas was better. And actually the data is that the hardware stores are actually better in rural communities because people actually fix their own stuff. But they have one in Exeter and like nobody uses it because they all pay someone to come hang a light, you know, hang a whatever it is, right? And they have one in like Burnville or I forget where it is. And that's all farmer community and everybody's out there fixing everything they, you know, and they're keeping it going or whatever it is. And so like our revenues comparatively, they're like, it's 10-1 housetops because usually they base it on how many housetops are nearby. So I was thinking about that, like JB Zimmerman's is probably swamped because they're in a rural community where people will still work with their hands.
Right.
And if you put one in Wayne, it wouldn't have the same volume just because people don't do that stuff, whether they choose not to or they don't have the ability to do it. And it's funny because like nowadays, I mean, I had to rip what are those things called in the sink? Like grinder out of a sink.
Oh yeah.
And there's like videos for that. Like you can figure out how to do anything, but so many people don't want to disposal.
Right? Waste disposal.
Didn't even want to do it because they just like, I just call a plumber, which is good for the service industry in general. That's why we're such a big fan of it and the trades. But at the same time, like people just don't even want to like,
well, and Brian,
it's got electricity involved. I'm not getting near it.
Yeah.
Brian and I talk about this actually, that what the internet has done in that sense of being able to, you could fix almost anything, you know, and so we had, you know, we got a new roof put on the house and new skylights, and they don't make the skylights that you like twist the blind down anymore, or they didn't. And so they put in solar blinds. So they're solar powered, and you had to turn them on. Really, I realized after the fact, all I had to do was turn them on. There was a switch in the way up in the light, or in the window, but in the skylight, but it's very high. So I had like a 50-page instruction book in 7 languages, which I'm already like disinterested. I don't want to read. I don't even really want to see where the English is. I just want to go mess with it. And I was like, oh wait, I should just watch a video. And I watched like a 2-minute video. I was like, it's so easy. Like went and did it. You know, but it's one of those things like I was like, well, I don't know how to turn this thing on. You know what I mean? And then I looked at it and you can find a video to show you how to do anything. And we are by nature capable people. Like I'm not saying Brian Ford Dan. I'm saying humans are very capable. We are very skilled at doing things, especially if somebody can show you how to do it. And I think that might be replacing what we talk about, right? Like it would be replacing that you teach your kids how to change their brakes. Like I think there'll probably come a time when a kid would be like, well, I want to change my brakes, so I'll just look up how to change my brakes, and there'll be a video that shows you how to change the brakes on that vehicle. And effectively the same, though. I think there's some like interpersonal skill bonding that's lost there, you know. But it's funny, you picked a few things that, like, I have taught the girls to mow the grass. I only let Mara mow it currently, just because of the mower, and I feel like, you know, I think I could let Charlotte do it. I think Nora might try and chase her sisters down with the mower. And we had to have that explanation. Like in the train, you know, like when you start to think about how you teach people to do things, I realized as a parent that it becomes important. Like I taught her every piece of running the mower, and she like messed around with it. And I needed to teach her like the risk of the mower.
Sure.
Because she didn't comprehend. I was like, if you run over your sister, you will chop her legs off. Like that's what's going to happen. She's going to get caught underneath those blades. They're not going to stop in time. It's going to be really bad. She was like, you can hurt someone with a lawnmower? I was like, it's a machine with blades spinning on it. And I don't have every safety on, you know what I mean? This is my mower, not a company mower. Sure. You know, there's some safeties that have been removed to make it run a little more efficiently for me. So I like had to explain that, you know, and you think about that, and there's benefit in that sort of teaching from a relationship standpoint. I think of whether it be a coworker or a friend or a parent to a child. Yeah. You know, there's something that happens there when you transfer that knowledge. It actually brings me to a picture I saw that we had taken. Tori took a picture when we were up at Brad's. And it was Greg and Robbie sitting on the tailgate of a truck. We had brought up pizza for the guys, and they're sitting on the tailgate of a truck and just sitting there. And the picture sort of struck me because you had multiple generations that were talking, and they could have been talking about anything. But the reality is, Robbie has learned a lot from Greg, and from a lot of other guys in the crew. But it's one of the things that makes me proud is we always talked about the tribal nature of our business, that we don't want to teach people things, and siloing of information. Like if you just localize it. And there was something about the picture of Robbie and Greg sitting there that made me think like that's who we want to be.
Mm-hmm.
We want to be that. We want to be that. There's a 20-year-old and a you know what I mean, an older guy sitting there, and they're talking about who knows what, but they're talking.
Yeah. Do you think circling back a little bit to the paths to the trades or whatever we want to call it, do you think that there is? I don't think there's a one best way, right? Do you think as an employer, even internally and maybe globally as construction in general, do you think there's a preference there as an employer?
Yes. And it's not to, tout one way or the other, but, if someone is willing to, in the old days, people would just jump into construction because it was a quick way to make a buck.
Sure.
So if someone's undecided and they just end up in construction, like you don't know how if they're really committed to the business. But when you see someone that came out of maybe a high school trade school or something like that, like they had to have already made decisions in their life that they wanted to do something. And that really seems to clarify it for us that they want to be in this industry.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't mean that, we had a kid here years ago and like when he was 15, he was trying to come work for us and he couldn't work for us because, we can't legally have him. And then he was 60 and then he was 17 and he just kept like coming back like, can I work yet? Can I work yet? Can I work yet? Which is ridiculous. And so that's a whole nother conversation. But like that person I knew wanted to be in this business.
Right.
But if someone just like, well, I didn't really
I
have
didn't
a
know what to do
plan.
next.
I just kind of, saw you had to help wanted to sign out and decide to jump in it. Those people can learn to love it too.
Sure.
But if you're looking at two possible candidates and one has already made the choices ahead of time that looks like they want to be in the industry, you have a better potential with that than someone that just is kind of still figuring out their target in life.
So I'll piggyback on that because I don't disagree with Ford. I agree. But the other thing, when we're looking is what experience do you have? We're talking about specifically young people now. So when I say experience, I'm saying like somebody comes in and they're like, well, I've never really done this, but I worked on a farm. I'm not even saying they were a farmer. I'm saying like,
they milk cows at 5 a.m.
I milk cows at 5 a.m. Like, okay. So it reminds me of what they say about college. The benefit of college is not actually, employers aren't actually often impressed by college. They're impressed by the fact that you completed the tasks that were set ahead with required pieces, and you were able to make it through that. So that would infer to a company that you are able to see things through at its most base level. Right. So I sort of take it that way, that when you see that, a guy come in and he's like, well, I've been, the whole time I was in high school, I worked for a landscaper all summer and I did this on the side and so they build it like I've been working towards wanting to work in the time that I had for, 3 or 4 years. But it's for the same exact reason as Ford had said, which is it shows, okay, they have a plan. They didn't just show up here because there was a sign out front and they're like, oh, maybe I don't want to work at McDonald's. I'll give this a shot. But if I don't like it, I'll just be at McDonald's in the next week.
Right. Yeah.
So I think that there's a couple ways to that path. But I think that's it. I think it's wanting to see, I think we do better as an employer when people are doing it because they want to do it, not because they need to do it or they're just trying to find their way.
I think that, and I think that definitely applies like for young people specifically. No matter how they got to us, I think that usually applies, right? So if they decided to go to a technology and trade school for 2 years or 4 years because they knew they wanted a path to the trades and then come to us, I think like that's a good scenario. I think when kids come to us right out of high school, but they went to a career in technology program or something of that nature, like that is a good path to the trades for us, because we like when we get young people in some of their first and earliest experiences in the trades, because it sort of gives us a chance to mold them a little bit, right? Like, not only do we and when we have the right people in the right capacity, get to show them what the trades can look like, we also get to show them what we think our good culture looks like, what career trajectory could look like. And I think to some extent, because of our size and how agile we are at times as a company, I think we get to show them a lot of things sooner than they might see other places. I think you're right though. I think when someone just graduates from high school and says, I don't know what to do next, I'm just going to go to construction because I think it's an easy paycheck, not easy
Not
paycheck.
easy.
There's no easy
Low
about the
barrier
paycheck.
to
No
entry.
precursor required.
But yes,
No
yeah,
prerequisite.
right, yep. Then a lot of times, not every time, but a lot of times, that's not the person that ends up.
Well, and they could end up, and
Yeah.
be very clear, they could
Yeah.
end up in the trades,
Oh yeah,
but they just might be 4 companies later before they settle in and find a place where they're ready for it to be their home.
where it makes sense, or they've gained and garnered some level of experience to actually find their fit and all of those things.
Yeah.
And yeah, totally. So
I mean, I don't think there's a wrong way if you want to. I think the biggest thing is, and we've talked about this in a number of different ways, that you have to want to be in the trades. It's not, and I even want to back it off of the trades. Jobs aren't easy. If it was easy to go to work every day, they wouldn't have to pay you. You know what I mean? Like, in other words, it requires something. They're buying something, as we talk about. And so that's the biggest piece is when you find a spot where you want to be, make it somewhere you want to be, doing something you want to do. Because then it makes it easier to go to work every day. And a happy employee is a better employee, and a better employee is a better company.
yeah, good points. That's probably a good place to wrap it up. I think that's an interesting topic, and I think we
Just scratch the surface on that one.
we scratched the surface, but danced through a bunch of different scenarios that probably could be independent podcasts at some point in time. So, but thanks for joining us today, folks. We hope you got something from this, and we hope you come back for another episode.